Welcome to Fraction of a Teacher, the podcast where two trainee maths teachers share our journey from changing careers into the wild world of teaching. I'm Francis.
And I'm Jen. Join us as we reflect and just have a laugh about life in the classroom. So whether you're thinking about starting a career in education, you're already a trainee teacher in the thick of it all, or you're just curious what it takes to shape young minds, you are definitely in the right place. So let's dive in.
Hello, and welcome back to our final episode of this season. Hi, Jen.
Hey, Francis, how are you?
Good. I suppose feeling really quite relaxed. We had our last week in school a couple of weeks ago, our last week at uni last week. We went out paddleboarding one evening, delivered our last lessons, finished the course. So, just really enjoying a little bit of slower pace and not planning lessons every evening.
I know. I'll tell you what I feel like I should be like planning lessons and like doing exercise and not feeling guilty. Like being able to go out paddling. I've been out paddling for the last 2 days. Last night I did a moonlight paddle in Christchurch. It was amazing. It was so much fun. But we are talking and we have a very special guest with us today. So today we have Jeremy. Hi, Jeremy.
Hello.
Hi, Jeremy. This is, I think this is something we must have talked about ages ago. When we came up with the initial idea of a podcast, it was in discussion with Jeremy, who ran our course at Chichester. And I'm sure we said at the time, we'll get you on as a guest, Jeremy. So we managed it.
And then for the last few months, I want to keep the whole thing at arm's length, just in case one of you said something which I would have to deny and wanted to say, this has nothing to do with me. This was entirely their idea. I had no part in it. So I've kept it at a great distance. But as of yesterday, we had our final exam board and I'm able to confirm to the masses listening in that both Francis and Jen have passed all aspects of the programme and will be recommended for qualified teacher status. So congratulations to you both.
Oh, thank you. The relief.
That's amazing. God, do you know what? It feels, I'll tell you what, when people say it goes quick, it goes quick. And it's amazing to finally be in this position. Jeremy, do you want to introduce who you are and how you know us? Because we've kind of just said you are Jeremy, but would you like to give us a little bit of an introduction about who you are and why you know that all of a sudden we've passed? Because otherwise it's just some random person named Jeremy telling us that we passed.
An excellent idea. And you're the bosses, so you take this conversation in whatever direction feels right.
That's a strange feeling. But yes, Jeremy, do you want to give us an introduction about who you are?
Yeah, so I'm Jeremy and I'm a maths teacher, essentially, and that's how I like to introduce myself. But for the last few years, I have had the privilege of leading the PGCE secondary maths route. And I had the great pleasure of meeting different points in the last couple of years, Francis and Jen, who came to me with the aspiration of one day becoming qualified maths teachers. And it's been my privilege and pleasure to take that journey with you both over the last 10 months. So I am the PGCE program coordinator, was the PGCE program coordinator. I'm the PGCE Maths coordinator at the University of Chichester.
That is brilliant. Thank you, Jeremy. And I suppose it's worth saying at this stage that Jeremy met us for that initial, I remember getting in touch and saying, Jeremy, I'm Francis, I'm looking at changing career into teaching. And we had an initial sort of chat over a coffee and everything from there through getting onto the course. And then you obviously led the maths sessions and several of the other sessions across the sort of whole cohort of trainee teachers over the last year with the sort of group of us who've been learning how to become maths teachers. So no, thanks for everything over the last year. It's, as Jen says, it's surprising how quickly it's gone and how closely we've got to know each other as we sort of explore different aspects of teaching. And you've taught in various schools across different bits of the country in your sort of previous career.
I have, and I think, I have. So I started off as an unqualified teacher in a private school in Wales, and during those first 2 years, I got my PGCE, and then I actually left teaching after the end of those 2 years, quite disillusioned with the whole profession, but it kind of has a way of sneaking you back in. So I needed to earn a little bit of money, and I worked as a supply teacher for a year, which I have to say was a fabulous experience. Going in, I got to know so many different schools. I got to learn so many different ways on which schools operate, different ethos. And I love the challenge of walking to a classroom and a bunch of year nines who you've never met before come in, and suddenly you've got to teach them about the beginning of the Second World War. And, and somehow drawing upon that very limited, sketchy knowledge that you might have and somehow making a lesson come alive. And I used to love that challenge. And trying to make things up as you go along on a very flimsy basis is kind of quite a lot of fun. So I did that. Then I did 3 years full-time teaching at a an all boys comprehensive, and then switched to a mixed school for the last 6 or 7 years of my teaching career before having the pleasure of starting to work with teacher training courses.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the background, because I think that's been evident as we've gone through the year. It's been great. That kind of breadth of experience you were able to bring was great fun, and some of the stories you're able to tell us from your time in the classroom.
Yes, some of which can be shared on air, but a few probably need to stay secret and hidden.
I would agree with Francis. It's been so nice. We started with a group of 9 and we got to know each other really well because it felt so personal, and we were each kind of at different stages of our kind of career, and that was a really nice mix. We're gonna go straight in. How much do you think about the people and how they're gonna mix when you think about putting a course together, like now?
Hugely, and I'm still recruiting. I'm still interviewing for my PGC course for next year's, and actually that is really, really important. And one of the things that's so special about running one of the PGC routes at Chichester is that small cohort size. And I think in an earlier podcast, I think Francis might have referenced the group size. At Chichester, we have group sizes of around about 10 students per subject. And while that does have some limitations, because the finances mean that you're going to have a much smaller pool of tutors with expertise to share, the benefits of that are that you get one tutor working with their cohort who gets to know that cohort extremely well. That tutor plans the sessions, they plan the subject-study sessions, and they choose the schools, they work closely with the mentors, they visit students in school. They're the people who set the nuance of the subject specificity of the 2 subject assignments. They then support the students with the writing assignments, they mark the assignments, they write the references, they visit the students in school, they sign off the final assessment review at the end of the course, and that level of individual attention is something that's incredibly special. And it's something which you really get when you're working with a smaller cohort of students. But you've got to remember that with a small cohort of students, one individual can really change the dynamic of the whole group. And that can be a really positive influence, but it can also overbalance. And so when I'm looking and deciding who I want to work with, there are so many criteria that I use. But one of the ones that's really important to me is that I'm going to work with people who are going to work really well as the group, and a positive group dynamic within university sessions, and then work really well and positively and contribute well to departments in school.
And to what extent, I suppose it's very difficult to sort of talk about this as it's not an exact science. How does that sort of, suppose, relative to the weight of your pure maths skills and knowledge? Because I think I was pretty nervous about it in a way. Is my maths, I had to do quite a bit of revision to prepare for the assessment to come and join the course. I'm not at the level that, say, a maths graduate who's just graduated from uni would be.
So if you'll forgive me, I'm not going to answer the question you've asked. I'm going to answer a much broader question.
No, perfect.
Because essentially what you're asking is kind of what am I looking for, what the skills that I'm looking for somebody who presents and applies for the program. And when I meet people, they're all at different stages. They're all at different levels of readiness for the PGCE. But what I'm looking for is the potential. So what I'm looking for from somebody who presents to me is the potential to go in and be somebody who's going to really engage and inspire kids. And specifically, I'm looking for people who are going to really engage and inspire kids with a lifelong love of mathematics. So I need to know people who are going to, be able to impart knowledge, help children develop skills, knowledge, understanding, but I'm looking ideally for more than that. I'm looking for people who are going to really motivate and inspire them. So nobody's got that. I mean, if you had all that on the day you met me, then there'd be no point in you doing a PGCE. You should just get qualified teacher status immediately. There's a few skills you need to learn, a bits of knowledge you need to learn, but essentially you are the finished article. Nobody who comes to me is the finished article. Everybody has different strengths. So some people will come with phenomenal subject knowledge, with an ability to take a piece of mathematics that they can do, break it down into sequenced steps, and actually sequence that learning, explain that learning, and it's a fabulous skill. And that depth of subject knowledge only really comes from people who've studied the subject at quite a high level, and usually somebody who's got some experience of either tutoring or teaching or working within schools. Quite often, those people who have those skills need help in other ways. So there's a lot of technical things you need to learn as a teacher, and you look at things like the ITT-ECF, this kind of curriculum that all teacher training courses have to follow. They tell us the things that we have to teach you. You have to learn about effective forms of assessment, how to adapt your teaching. There's a lot of statutory information you need to take on board. I could go on for a long time, as I have done in your sessions, about the things that you need to learn.
Yeah.
But somebody with phenomenal subject knowledge still has a great deal to learn. And often they have to learn about the skills of engaging. They have to learn how to present a personality that's going to be of interest to teenagers. Other people come along and they've got that skill nailed. And they come along and I'm thinking, well, I can see you in front of a class of children. I can see you standing up and kids are going to love you. But at the moment, you don't know how to factorize a quadratic equation. And although that may be a skill which is kind of, you're only going to teach once or twice a year, if possibly never, it's still something you are going to have to be able to do if you're going to qualify as a teacher. So, but that's a skill that can be learned. And so I don't know if it's fair to take a couple of case studies, but, seeing as we've got
you might have two in front of you.
We've got a couple in front.
You could talk about us, it's fine.
We can always edit this later.
So, I mean, neither of you, when you came for interview, were the complete package. You both had huge strengths that I could see instantly. I could see immediately huge strengths in you both as teachers and classroom.
Was it that obvious?
It was that obvious. It was that obvious. But we'll come to you, Jen. We'll come to your experience in a second. But Francis was probably the more straightforward. So, I mean, Francis, first of all, had shown phenomenal levels of commitment and organisation in the sense that he'd reached out to me and contacted me months before he applied. And Francis, your timing's terrible. Your email arrived. I was just about to go in to teach the whole cohort and lead the whole cohort. It was like the day 2 of the PGCE program. And suddenly this email comes in introducing himself and saying he was thinking about maybe becoming a teacher. But the fact that you did that and you reached out to me kind of straight away showed that you weren't ready to apply. You were exploring options, but it showed that you were prepared to reach out, to take some advice, to gather that information, and straight away there's strength there. And then, after we'd met up, we had a coffee together, and then you'd come along, you put your formal application in, and I interviewed you just before Christmas. And, you had a scientific background, you had used maths in a phenomenal number of contexts, but when it came to, knowledge of the GCSE curriculum and those weird little topics that appear in the English maths curriculum and don't appear anywhere else on the planet, there were gaps, and there were significant gaps. And we needed to discuss quite openly and honestly how we're going to fill those gaps in. And then there were other aspects as you presented and things that I thought, you came from a background where you were used to a very structured environment. And I thought, this is somebody who's got an awful lot to learn about the flexibility and how things work within a school context. And I thought, he's going to learn this. He's somebody who's going to pick this out. And I thought all the gaps, all those, the strengths were clear, and all the areas where you had to learn, that's what a PGCE course is designed to do. So very, very easy decision, straight away. Absolutely, you had the skills I was looking for. You had the capacity to learn what you needed to learn. You were great. And then we turned to Jen, who applied.
But she's great.
It's great now.
Jen, you are a phenomenal teacher. I mean, we'll come to that in a moment. But when you first met, you weren't ready. And there's a huge arrogance in what I've just said, because it's a very subjective view. You applied to me, you came to me, and immediately I could see strengths. And those strengths have come across through all these podcasts. I mean, everybody can hear your personality. You are so engaging. You are somebody who's so easy to listen to. You were always going to be a fabulous person in the classroom. But for a whole host of reasons, when I first met you, quite late in the cycle, when you first applied, I just had this instinctive feeling that you weren't quite ready. You weren't quite settled and certain of ready to come in and commit to the pressures of a PGCE. And your subject knowledge was a little bit rusty, and you needed to do a little bit of work on that. And your
That's
degree,
very generous.
Your degree
very
your degree was outside of mathematics, huge transferable skills, but I made that fairly arrogant, cutting assessment of you, and I rejected Jen. And thank God, it paid off, because what she did was she went away, she worked on the things that I recommended, she came back, she reapplied, and that straight away I could see the progress she'd made. I could see her commitment, the fact that she'd taken this rejection, she'd gone away, she'd learned from it, she came back so much stronger. And you still weren't the complete package. You still had so much to learn, but those skills were so clear on that interview, because you were somebody who was going to be committed to the teaching profession. You were going to really get through to kids. You were going to inspire children, and you had already started to learn those things you needed to learn, and the PGCE could do the rest. And thank goodness you did, because you could so easily have found a PGCE training course. You could have taken your rejection from me, gone off, found somewhere else. You could have gone on a teacher training program, and you would have come through. But I think, I'd like to convince myself, I'd like to con myself that for you it was the right decision, and you are so much stronger and ready to go now than you would have been otherwise. So
No, I would agree.
In my little fantasy world, I like to convince myself and pretend it was a great decision.
No, it was. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that it was a very quick turnaround. So I must have applied, late August 2023, roughly. And I then went away and came back and applied in October 2023. Within those weeks, I had started speaking to teachers. Like, I'd done so much just to kind of really consider if this is what I wanted to do. And I wasn't ready at all. I would have got on, and I probably would have struggled through, but I would have struggled to the point where I wouldn't have thrived, and I probably would have been very burnt out very quickly. So I think you made the right decision. I will happily confirm that from you, Jeremy. You made the right decision for me.
Well, you're very generous. And I think actually both of you illustrate something that's really important. And that is, it's kind of quite rare that I receive an application from somebody I don't know anything about. It's partly because of the small cohort size, but actually if anybody is listening to this podcast who's contemplating a move into the teaching profession, reach out, go and make contact. Don't wait for the application. Just reach out to the people running the course and say, hi, I'm thinking about applying. Can you give me any advice? And everybody receiving that email will be pleased and excited. Not everybody will have the capacity to kind of make a huge investment of time prior to application, but I promise you it'll be worthwhile. And if you can engage with a tutor, you will learn a lot that will help you with your application. So please don't hesitate just to drop that email, make that contact, and try and start a conversation with the person who may one day be interviewing you.
And I think absolutely, from my side as a candidate, really back that up. And I think it was my initial discussions with different training providers that helped me work out what kind of training provider and the sort of personalities involved in that, and how I was going to find a training, initial teacher training that was going to suit me. And I think that was really useful, those initial discussions in sort of shaping that. Are there any other sort of, that's a great tip for people who are considering this. Are there any other tips you'd say those people who are, where we were a year or two ago, and looking at going into teaching, what else would you say from your experience of sort of those meetings and interviews and running the course? Anything else you'd suggest?
Yeah, loads. So first and foremost, if you're thinking about becoming a teacher, I've already said make contact with a course tutor, but actually prior to that, just do a little bit of homework. It doesn't really matter whether you use your time in a particularly effective way or not. Do something. Find out about teaching. Go and speak to somebody who's teaching. Go and just find out some information about how courses are structured. Show that you've done a little bit of homework and research, because when somebody comes to me and says, I'm thinking about becoming a teacher one day, and I start asking, so why is that the reason? And it becomes clear they haven't really thought it through. That straight away is a kind of slightly negative sign. So first of all, do a little bit of homework, but then do reach out and speak to the tutor very early on. But there is one thing above all others, which I recommend to anybody who's contemplating a career change or is currently a student, an undergraduate student, thinking about applying for a postgraduate teacher training course at the end of their degree. And that one thing is, if at all possible, get yourself into a school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, she's completely different going in as a grown-up, going in as an adult, and going in and seeing some lessons, but you're watching it from the perspective of somebody who's contemplating standing up in front of a class and watching the teacher. Now, what I say to people is go into school and just absorb the atmosphere, just go with the flow, just enjoy being there. And then at the end of the day, I really, really hope that you're going to leave that school saying, wow, this is what I want to do. And that's the ideal. That's that you go into school and you just say, this is a role which I can do. It's It's a job, it's going to make a difference, it's a career. I just want to work with these kids. But it's not unusual to go into a school and come out thinking, oh my God, that's not what I expected. That's really a little bit full on. And if that's your experience of one school, before you take that one experience and go, you know what, teaching isn't for me, try and go to a different school. Because as I know, one of the themes that's come through several episodes of the podcast this year, it's been the contrast between the two school placements.
Yeah.
And one thing that you've both learned is just how different schools can be.
Yeah.
And if somebody walks into one school and sits in a few lessons and doesn't like it, it may well be that if they'd walked to a different school, they'd have come out completely motivated, inspired, and enthused. So you owe it to yourself to do that. Now, if it's not always practical, it's not always possible to get into a school. And so it's something that's actually very, very difficult. And if you're self-employed and you need to take a day away from your income in order to go and spend a day in school, it's really hard to do that. So if you can't do it, you can't do it. But it's one of those things where if you've not been into a school environment, the risk is that you come to meet me, I interview you, I offer you a place in the course, you accept the place in the course, you arrive in September full of enthusiasm and, you go through in the first 3 weeks at university, you go through and then you go into school. And at that point you go, this isn't quite what I thought it was going to be. And so you kind of owe it to yourself, if at all possible, to go and make sure that if schools are not the right environment for you, that you discover that before you start the programme and not after. It's not a given that if you start a PGC, you're going to finish. And people do realise partway through the year that it's not for them. And some people find that actually they're not quite ready to demonstrate the skills that they need. And it's always sad. And I always feel quite personally responsible when that happens, because I feel it's somehow I should have seen that coming and avoided it, or I should have supported students better. But it does occasionally happen. But in almost every case, not all, but in almost every case, it's somebody who actually didn't really have that school experience before they started.
Yeah.
That's the reason behind it.
I would going to school beforehand, even before, after my interview, but just being in school and just being in the back classroom and looking at the teacher and not learning, but just watching how the teacher almost performs and just understanding scheme of work, lesson planning, all of the things that they do that you don't see and they almost make it look effortless is really so helpful. And I think we've mentioned it, Francis, actually just getting that we both had time in school beforehand and how much that really did enable us to even just get used to the volume. Kids are loud. 900 to 1,500 kids is loud. And
it's a very intense work. And I think if you thrive in that, if you thrive being surrounded by energy and enthusiasm and noise and not really ever being able to take any time off because you're always, around people. I think some people thrive in that, but if it's not for you, then better to find out earlier than later.
Or find yourself a school where you have silent classrooms, and such schools do exist.
Yeah.
And there are schools where the behaviour management structure, the behaviour policy is very, very tight. And children arrive in the classroom and they sit down and they get their books out and they are ready to learn. Now, it's achieved through hard work, and it's not for everybody, and you lose some things as well as gaining other things in that kind of environment. But schools are so different that kind of really noisy, exciting kind of dynamic environment that some teachers like, you'll find in some schools. In other schools, you find a very different culture and ethos. So as you have both learned this year through two contrasting placements and two very different places that you worked in.
Do you mind maybe giving a little bit of insight into how you choose or how you consider placements for us? Because obviously you were very open when we first met you, and I will say you give a lot of time and attention. And Jeremy, you are doing a phenomenal job at what you do. You are incredible. I hope whenever we say PGC mentor, we are talking about Jeremy. He spends so much time. You've been nothing but available to us. But I know you spend a lot of time thinking about placements, and you probably think you always don't get them quite right. But I think you do a great job.
I don't. So, but then, I used to beat myself up when things go wrong. But there's things you can't predict. So placing a student in a school depends on knowing the student. And when I do my first school placements, I don't know the students very well. So as we're not really talked about my interviews, but my interviews are pretty horrendous. And I mean, you've both got first-hand experience of this. Jen's done it twice. She came back for more. But my interviews are pretty intense things. And I do all sorts of things within an interview. I want to know, how is my potential student going to cope when they are given some pretty direct feedback? So I will get you to do some fairly tough GCSE questions to sound out.
I remember those, and they were not pleasant.
and I love the way it kind of is. There's a kind of shared experience when my students arrive in September, and they've all been through this same ordeal. So it's a kind of bonding experience, maybe, or I can pretend it is. But no, I mean, in my interview, it's quite an intense experience. But part of what I do is I try and spend longer than I should do in a room talking to the student to really get to know who they are. And then there are students who come along, and I know from their background, they've been through, an all-girls private school. Now, there's nothing, that doesn't count against them in any way, shape, or form. But it may not be the right placement for them to go to a really tough inner city state school for their first placement. But I will almost certainly aim to send them to maybe a kind of, a large comprehensive school for their second placement, but maybe their introduction to teaching should be something a little bit closer to what they're used to. Somebody else may come to me and say, look, I want to be a teacher who's going to really make a difference to the lives of disadvantaged young people. So I had a trainer a few years ago who'd worked extensively with a drugs rehabilitation charity working with young people, teenagers, in a city not far from here. And she had said, look, I want to work in a school where I'm going to be working directly with these children. And I was thinking, well, you're going to be applying for a job probably very early on. And I think you need to understand what it means to work in particular kind of school and realize just how tight and supportive the staff have to be, but actually understand what it feels like to stand up and teach mathematics to a group of children in this kind of school. And so I will send them to a particular kind of school. So a lot of it really depends on knowing my students as well as I possibly can. Plus, I need to know their geography. I need to know where they're going to live, whether they've got access to a car. We actually ask a question. There's a form we have to fill in before you come in. It says, do you have access to a reliable car? And I need to know that the people who are going there are going to be able to commute by car, or I need to find a school which is accessible to transport. So there's an awful lot of things that go in. For my second placement, when I know students a lot better, something else that comes into the equation is who you're going to be working with. And so much of the success of a placement is not down to the nature of the school, the kind of kids at the school, but it's the people you're going to work with. And this is where I have to try and make a prediction of how a character who I know well is going to work with other characters who I know a little bit, but maybe less well, which are the teachers and the mentors in schools. And this is where I make mistakes and I get things wrong. And I will place students and I think, so this student has got a particular character who's going to gel really, really well with this mentor. And sometimes I get it right, and sometimes I'm afraid I do get it wrong. So it's always part of the calculus of making that decision is the personalities that I'm working with and what you need to learn. And there are so many things that go into that discussion. I've actually got a piece of paper on my desk in front of me, which is my next year's cohort. And I'm in about the third or fourth iteration of this. So I've now provisionally decided the schools, but I'm still not entirely certain which student's going to go to which school.
Wow, is it that early? Do you really, is it really early on that you start thinking about these things?
And it is at the interview when I first start thinking.
Wow. Okay.
It has to be. Because also, I've also got to keep an eye on the fact that if I'm interviewing somebody quite late in the cycle, I need to be aware that I've allocated certain key schools to other students. And if somebody comes in, sometimes I'll say, if somebody applies now, if people applications are still coming in for September, and if I interview somebody tomorrow, Saturday, it's unlikely. If I interview somebody on Monday, I will be upfront and I will say, so you're applying late in the cycle. It's unlikely I'm going to find you a school on your doorstep for the first placement. I'd rather you commuted for an hour each way to a school which is the right school for you.
Yeah.
And I think something that I suppose we've both been through, and I suppose you've got to bear in mind as a student, is that you don't necessarily know what you need in the same way that somebody like yourself who's seen countless students come through, seen lots of different placements and things. I think there's a bit of having faith that I knew very little about my first placement school, and actually it turned out it was a brilliant fit. Really enjoyed working with a mentor there and things, so it was really positive. But actually it was, in a way, you've got to just, I think as a student, just accept that you've got someone very experienced who's going to take charge of this, and they will probably know better than you do where you need to focus. So I feel very lucky the way mine worked out.
Well, there was an element of luck there. It did work extremely well, your first placement, and I think there was an element of luck involved in that one. I thought you would thrive there. I thought you'd do really well, but you gave the impression you absolutely loved it, and I was very, very pleased with that. Really pleased.
I feel very lucky overall. Thank you for the time and effort you put in for those.
I felt very lucky with my first placement as well. And actually my second placement, I felt I grew to love my second placement because I had so much love for my first placement. And anyone that is planning to go onto the PGCE or think about it, you'll become attached to your placement A if you love it, because you've spent so much time there, you've built the relationships, and you're going to go back and be the new kid again. And it is really tricky, but you were there for a reason. And if you were choosing the PGCE, possibly because you like the idea of two contrasting placements. And me and Francis have both said previously, when we've gone to look for where we want to work and spend our ECT years, without those two placements, I don't think I'd be as confident to be able to walk into my school and go, what about this? And thinking I could see myself here and really enjoying that. So I loved my first school. I loved my second school for very different reasons, but they were very different schools.
You're going to have a great job of trying to edit this down, because once I start talking, I don't stop. So
we've got a great editing team.
There's two things kind of relating to that I'd like to touch upon. The first one is just about the nature of the PGC and why a PGC is in many ways a much, much harder option when you're going through. When I say PGC, I mean the traditional university-led training where you have two kind of equally weighted placements, or more or less equally weighted placements. My role as somebody who is supporting a group of students is to prepare you to teach in any school. And that's really difficult because schools are so different and their approach to teaching maths is so varied. And so I cannot stand up in front of you and say, this is what great maths teaching looks like. This is what you need to do. Here's the algorithm. This is how you should explain things. It just doesn't work like that. I have to work with a very, very diverse, varied group of students with very, very different strengths. And I can't say you all need to teach in this way, because some of those students will teach very successfully in that way. Others will have different ways and different models of teaching. Similarly, those student teachers are going to go and work in, first of all, one school, which is very different to all the schools the other students are at. And then I'm going to take them out of there and I'm going to parachute them into a completely different school with a completely different way of doing things. And somehow my role is to prepare my students to work in any of these very, very different environments. So if you go to a training program where it's focused on one particular school or one particular group of schools, there are huge strengths and advantages to that, because you get a much clearer view of what great teaching looks like. But at the end of the day, it's what great teaching looks like in that particular school or that particular group of schools. Every training program will place you in a second school, so you will get that variety, but the weighting is much more into one environment. University-led training is harder because you just get established, you just find your feet, you just start to be able to teach well, and then I pull you out and you go straight into another school and it's completely different and you feel like you go straight back to square one. But at the end of the course, the breadth of experience you've got has, I think, given you a much broader basis for a long and successful teaching career. That's my position, but as I often say, what I believe doesn't mean it's right, and certainly doesn't mean it's right for every single trainee. So it's a personal view based on the kind of job that I've done. It also feeds into the second thing I wanted to say, which is about your podcast through the course of the year. You have made this podcast all about focusing on different aspects of teaching, about your experiences and unpicking, and you have been throughout the most positive ambassadors for teaching I could ever have wished. I mean, I am so proud that you chose to come and do your PGC with us, because you are just going to be the most wonderful additions to the teaching profession, and you're going to be great ambassadors for this program and for this course, and I'm so grateful to you both for this. But when you listen to your podcast, you give the impression that it has just been hard at times, but it's been a really positive experience. And I know that no trainee, no student teacher has that. Every single student teacher will have highs and lows and challenges. And I know that for both of you, there have been moments during the course of this year which have been really, really tough. And that is I'm afraid, part of the profession, part of the role, certainly part of being a trainee teacher. I wish it wasn't. But there are always going to be better days and less good days. He says, trying to find positive language. And you've both been through that. And yet in your podcast, you've kind of never directly referenced this. But this is all associated with the challenges of trying to develop yourself and fit in very different environments and very different groups of people. And the fact you've kind of come through this and seen the positives of it, and at the end are now ready, so ready to take the next step in your teaching career, is just wonderful to behold.
Well, thank you. It's certainly, I suppose it's one of those things where anything really worthwhile isn't easy. And I think, it's just, I suppose both of us perhaps from our previous experiences realise that, and that's partly what gets you through, because there definitely are highs and lows, but as long as the balance is more highs than lows, I think it's all good.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And you've made it.
Yeah. And we've made it. And I think the thing is that, like, even now I still get the thing where I've been to my new school. I know what my next year is going to look like. And we had some great speakers on the last day who kind of prepared us for ECT life. Students that were sitting where we were last year and just finishing their ECT 1. And it was really great to see
Weren't they
them.
great?
Oh my God, weren't they lovely? They were so wonderful. Again, very, very contrasting, but gave us a really clear view of what life was like as an ECT.
Yeah.
And it was lovely because they were smiling. They were still, I felt they're still very passionate about the teaching career as well. And I still have a little bit of imposter syndrome. Like, I'm still not quite ready.
Me too.
Okay, good. I'm still not quite ready because I know that there's gonna be adapting to being the only sole responsible adult in the room, and I think it's just adapting to that level of responsibility. I think will still feel unnatural for a while, and I'm gonna just normalize that because I know that. Because when my mentor has walked out the room before and been like, I'm just going to get something, I've been like, no one's at the back of the room. Gosh. Gosh. And that's normal. That's normal to kind of have that.
And actually that specifically was one of the bits that I think the ECT teacher came back, one of them mentioned last week, was exactly that. And actually then saying how once you get used to it, it's lovely. And actually you can really have that kind of full ownership and things. So you're definitely, but I'm sure we'll have that for a while of that. As you say, a bit of imposter syndrome, suddenly realising that actually we are qualified teachers. It will take a while to sink in.
It's not going to take long. It really isn't. You're going to find after just a few days that kind of terror, excitement of just being a flying solo, very quickly you'll adapt to that and you'll enjoy it.
It should be good. Awesome. I've got a question which I'm really interested about asking, which hopefully to go with, Jeremy. It feels to me a bit like we come into maths teaching at a certain point in time, and for us, with our careers, and and obviously still, I think in schools with still feeling the aftermaths of sort of the COVID period, where the year 11s who've just finished their GCSEs, they started secondary school under quite heavy COVID restrictions often, and things, and the sort of changing nature of the way we teach mathematics. Lots of discussion about mastery. I'm listening to a book at the moment about how can we use technology more in the classroom. And I suppose what I'd be really intrigued by in those sort of points and other kind of context, what do you see as the kind of current trends, or looking back at your experience, where maths teaching has come from and where's it going, or teaching more broadly as a profession? We've obviously got a year's worth of view of this, but it'd be interesting to hear a bit more about the kind of long view.
What a great question. So 4.5 hours later, I finally stopped talking. So I'm really old. Okay, I'm in my 50s now.
You're not that old, Jeremy.
I'm old.
You're not that old, Jeremy.
I'm an old man. Look at my grey beard. So so I've been around a bit, and actually I shared with the cohort that on the 3rd of July, so what was it now, 8 days ago, I celebrated the 30th anniversary of my first ever maths lesson, which was a year 10 class in a porter cabin with mushrooms growing above the windows, and the year 10 class came in, and that was my very first experience of teaching. So I've been around for a long time. And, when you first come into the profession, suddenly this great new idea comes along, and, let's take a big one, okay? Let's look at mathematics mastery. And, when this mathematics first came in, it's almost halfway through my teaching career, and it was like a really revolutionary, big, new idea that was really going to transform the way in which maths was teaching. Had a huge impact on teaching in primary schools. It was a very, very exciting kind of development. And then it kind of lots of people interpreted it in different ways. There are lots of different ways of explaining what it is and understanding in different schools, particularly in secondary schools. Interpretations of it would be different from one school to another. And all of this makes my life and my job so much more exciting and fun, because I've got to somehow distill this down and explain this very complicated thing and make it valuable and useful for the students and give them a kind of broad understanding of it so that they can understand it when they go into schools. Big ideas like this come along all the time, and they always have done. One of my student teachers from 2 or 3 years ago, in their final assignment, was referencing this document, which was written by a Swiss-Italian maths educator. And it's the oldest reference I've ever seen, apart from a couple of people who might have referenced Plato just to be quirky over the years. But this source was published in 1879. I looked at it and I thought, well, what on earth is the relevance of this document? And then I went away and read it, clearly in translation. I read this, and it had a freshness and a relevance to modern teaching that was astonishing. And then in my own experience, so, my father was involved in maths education, and so growing up, I would have conversations around the dinner table. So I do remember, because I am that old, the publication of something called the Cockcroft Report, published in 1982, written largely with the research carried out in 1981, a hugely influential document. And the ideas that were presented in that, many of them had a huge impact on the way maths was being taught in schools. A lot of the recommendations would still be just as relevant today as they were 40 odd years ago, 43 years ago. So one of the things that I've learned from all the decades I spent in education is that every time a new big idea comes along, it's always worth engaging with. It's always valuable. There's always merit to every single one of these new ideas. When I first started teaching, my first teaching job, I had chalk. I taught with chalk. I had to have a washable Marks and Spencer's suit, and it put in the washing machine every week because it would be covered in chalk dust. Since I first started teaching, we have had, even computers were barely used in teaching of maths in the late 1990s. Then we had interactive boards came along, smart boards. Then we had tablets. We had the internet became a thing in my teaching career. And to the way in which we use technology to teach maths, there's so many more opportunities. And yet, when you kind of pick below the procedural stuff, how do we use a smart board? How do we use a tablet in a lesson? The underlying teaching ideas, I've come to realize, actually what makes great teaching has never really changed. And it's about teaching mathematics in a way that is interesting and relevant and stimulating, and in a way in which the children can understand. Sequencing of learning is being crucial. We now have all the latest vocabulary. We talk about sequencing, we talk about retrieval practice, we talk about working memory, and yet these ideas have always been there, and great teaching has always accommodated all of these different aspects of teaching from day one. Yeah, so I'm not dismissing changes. I'm certainly not dismissing change. Everything that comes along is worth engaging with. And I encourage anybody listening to this podcast to always be open, engaged, talk to people outside of your school, engage with the professional associations, read, watch podcasts, listen to podcasts. always seek inspiration that will enrich your teaching. But recognize that after a while, it may be that words change, and it may be that there will be something new in everything, but nearly always it comes back to original, to ideas been around for a long time. And I make a point. I mean, as you know, I reference very, very early on in the program, I reference the work of an educator who's working in the 1970s, Richard Skemp. And he talks about instructional relational understanding. And there's so many resonances between that and the mastery. And yet these were things published in the 1970s. And I'm not old-fashioned in my thinking in the way that I'm trying to slavishly stick to something that's 60 years old, 50 years old. But what I am trying to do is make this point that there are some constants in what makes great teaching. And I think, I told you it'd be a long answer.
No, it's good. As I say, particularly when you come into this and you sort of see a snapshot like we have, I think it's really interesting to take that kind of slightly longer view.
Jeremy, do you want to talk about what you love about your job? Because we have loved working with you in terms of you are the reason I picked the PGCE at the University of Chichester, because the relationship that you had already built with me. When you did reject me, you inspired me by rejecting me, which is the craziest thing I'm ever going to say. Probably not, actually. That's a lie. But I definitely felt inspired by being rejected, and I knew I wanted to come back. So I actually didn't apply to any other courses. I only applied to just hoping to get a place. So what do you love about your job? Because I wouldn't be here without you.
Yeah, it's people. It's people, but it's the satisfaction of watching those people develop through the course of the year. And I tried to do this in the very last time I met the maths group together. I just kind of do something I do every year. I went back and looked at a couple of the resources that you produced back in September, and it's a reminder of just how far you've come. So what are the best moments? So the best moments of my job are going in and seeing my student teachers teaching lessons in which children are engaged and learning, and just seeing how far they've come. And that is just the best feeling, because it's a feeling which you recognize that what you do as a job is still having an impact. When I was teaching, you could see that impact as you went through. You were working with children, you were shaping people's lives. When you're working with student teachers, it's kind of less obvious, but then you go into the classroom and you see just how far they've come, and see them teaching lessons and kids engaging with it and learning, and that's the best feeling of all. So it's over to you, really. It's a thank you to you for making my life so enjoyable.
I remember you coming to see me in placement B for my last observation. I had put one equation on a slide. And the difference between having to have everything on the board to having one equation and working it through and talking for like 5 minutes, the difference was outrageous for me. I looked back going, this would never happen 10 months ago.
So there was a podcast episode that I was expecting to see this year, and which I don't think ever appeared unless I missed it, which was a podcast episode on being observed.
Well, we could do that.
Oh, we could so do that. And actually, that'd be a really good one for the ECT eras, because that would be the changes and stuff. See?
Because part of the value of the podcast is the sense that actually, when you're a student teacher in school, you're often feeling slightly isolated. You're going through a whole lot of things and you're thinking, is this just me? And for a student teacher who's on placement to be able to just tune in and hear you reflecting on your experience as a trainee teacher just makes them realize that it's not just them, and everybody's kind of going through the same or equal challenges. And I think if the little different aspects of being a trainee teacher are some of the things you've really addressed so well through these podcasts. But one I thought was that I was kind of quite nervous about was about being observed, because part of my role is I have to come in and I have to observe student teachers teaching lessons. And I am aware that my mere presence on school causes some student teachers to get incredibly nervous and pent up and anxious, and others seem to take it in their stride. They sort of probably just hide it rather better. But actually, those visits which may be very stressful for you are really the best parts of my year. When I go back into the classroom, seeing kids and seeing my students doing the job they're training for. And so I just can't help it. I love it.
It's funny. I think that would be a really good, because I think you probably have a different perception of those being observed than we do. Not just that I don't enjoy it, but it is tricky sometimes. I put a year's work into getting better at teaching, and then of course it's a snapshot that's seen in an observation. So we could definitely do a little bit of a think through that. Thank you very much for the idea.
For next year.
That's it.
I do have a quick question. Could you see me and Francis as PGCE mentors for some of your new students coming through?
Absolutely. Both of you will be fabulous PGCE mentors. And I would really encourage you to try and get a little bit of experience under your belt, but don't leave it too long. Because being a mentor where you have some experience to draw upon which you can share with a student teacher, but being close enough to your own training to have those fresh memories will give you the empathy, to give you the patience to work with your student teacher, to understand the challenges that they're facing, the anxieties they have, and to be much, much more sympathetic in working with them. Your role as a mentor is not to set targets and to judge and to grade. Your role is to recognize where that student teacher is and recognize what they need to do to develop and give them the support to make that progress. From whatever starting point they're at, your role is to help them develop to the next step. And then both of you really understand that, and I know that from seeing you teach children, and you apply exactly the same principles when you're working with others. So both of you, if you wished, would be able to very quickly take on positions of responsibility with the school and school leadership. Now, it's a career path that not everybody wants to go down, but you both, within a few years' time, I'm absolutely certain, both of you would be fabulous leaders within school. And being a mentor is really good preparation for that as well. So I would love it if you came on the mentor training program in 2 to 3 years' time. I would be overjoyed.
But it's a small world. We'll keep in touch.
I'll still be here.
I think it'd be really fun, actually, and I do think you've got a point about that being fresh. Yeah, it feels like not quite yet, but I'd love to take that on. I can see that being fun and rewarding. Awesome. Go for it. Anything else, Jem?
Can I quickly share with you just one other thing? Because my favourite moment of the entire year.
See where this goes.
The thing is, I suspect you might have an inkling as to where we might be going with this one, because it was one of those kind of moments when I just felt so out of control, and I felt so momentarily terrified, and then I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to go with this, and it was such a laugh. You've mentioned it. You've mentioned it already. So every year, what I do is with my students is I get them to do what I call a little micro teaching task. I get them in the very safe zone of the PGCE room to teach a little tiny piece of a lesson to a very, very receptive and supportive audience, where if it's going to go wrong, you're not going to get kids throwing stuff and some kind of terrible outcome. You are in a very safe space. And it's really useful as well. It gives me an opportunity to give some kind of feedback and some suggestions and to pontificate at length about what I think great teaching should look like, as you know, I love to talk. But there was one session this year when it all kind of went a little bit strange. So the student teacher, and I knew nothing about what was going on, but I asked all the other student teachers in the room to model how they think a class would respond to the teacher. So I asked the person teaching that section of a lesson to say, so I want you to be a year 9 high attaining group, or I want you to be a year 7 mixed attaining class. And so the student teacher stood up and started teaching, and then some very strange things started going on. There was a little bit of back chat, and then there were a couple of students who started kind of throwing things at each other. And I was thinking, what earth is going on here? Is this how my student teachers think as a professional environment? Should I be getting upset about this? And then the penny dropped. You were modelling the kind of behaviour you might expect to see in some schools, or you might think you should see from some school in a year 9 low attaining group. And then what followed for the next 5 minutes was just the most enjoyable riot I've ever seen. From initial kind of concern about thinking, do I need to shut this down? Do I need to tell them to remind them of their professionalism? Actually, I just sat back and I just had a ball. And I stopped writing and I just enjoyed the ride. And the two of you modelling the behaviour of really quite awkward teenagers was just a joy.
I don't know where we got it from.
No idea.
So thank you so much for one of the most enjoyable moments of my professional career.
That was so much fun. I'll always remember that as one of my favourite moments. Francis, do you have a favourite? Was that your favourite moment as well, Francis?
It's got to be. And I think we'd spent a couple of weeks in school and come back to uni for that day. And I think what I remember you saying at the time, Jeremy, was just so true, was that we'd spend a bit of time sort of, I suppose, working with our, the pupils we're going to be teaching, and we'd kind of, as you said, we'd taken a kind of exaggerated sort of view of that, but we brought back, some of the kind of attitudes you might see. It sort of, as you said, it demonstrated that we'd definitely been paying attention in school, but it was great fun.
I've got a phrase for you both to Google after this: playful pedagogy. Because if you're looking for some kind of academic basis to try and justify things like that session, there's been quite a lot of exploration recently and discussion in the academic community about how teaching, effective models of teaching, and a lot of people have been exploring this term playful pedagogy. A bit of bedtime reading for you.
Oh.
Perfect.
Do you know what? I actually think that was my second favorite moment. I think my first favorite moment was walking in on the first day of that PGCE. I'm a real believer in small changes make big impacts in life, and a decision you make on one day, you'll never know the impact of it. Maybe even like 5-10 years later, or even like 10 months later. And I think it's probably a lot of my background of where I've worked in terms of prison and kind of those really dark places. And it all seems to start with one decision. But I think walking in on that first day, Jeremy, seeing your very smiley, very happy face, and then the first person I speak to, Well, you acted very well then. And then the next person I spoke to was Francis, where we got a coffee together. And then I look at from then to now. And thank you, Jeremy, because you're the one that said you two should do a podcast. And then that started a different line of kind of like, oh, we could do that. And then off we went. And now we're here. I don't think I'll ever understand the importance of that moment of getting a coffee with Francis.
Yeah.
Genuinely.
I think you're right.
You're such good buddies. And I love the fact you seem to think it was my idea. I'm quite certain it came from you. I'm quite certain the idea of the podcast came from you. But whatever, we'll kind of have to move that one on. But yeah. No, it's. I'm just so glad that the two of you happen to be on the same cohort. And I suspect a lifelong friendship has started over that coffee. So
he tolerates me very well.
It's two-way. I think what was how quickly Jen came up with the name. And she's like, I know what it needs to be. We need to be fraction of a teacher. That is ingenious. I think that's where that brings us to, which is we've got to put the question to you, Jeremy. If you were, and you're welcome to take this sort of in any direction that you see fit, but if we were to ask you what fraction of a teacher were you or are you, how would you go about answering that?
Yeah, so the thing is, you first started asking this question way back in the podcasts early on. And of course, as soon as you asked it, I kind of thought, well, where would I be on that? And it's a very, very easy answer. But it depends on what you mean by the question, and it really means what you mean by a teacher. Because you see, if you think a teacher is somebody who never makes mistakes, who is perfect, who knows it all, then nobody is ever going to be a complete teacher. Nobody's ever going to get to that point. You are always learning. And so if you want to say, look, I think I'm 2/3 of the way there, that kind of measures your optimism in that moment. Next time you say, look, maybe I'm only 1/3 of the way there, perhaps I've got more to learn than I thought. So it's a great measure of your sense of progress towards that goal. But if your goal is to be the perfect teacher who knows everything and is perfect in everything that you do, that's unfortunately not what a teacher is. Teachers are normal human beings. They are flawed and they make a lot of mistakes. And they have a huge amount to learn. And if you think that is a definition of a teacher, then I was a whole teacher. Because that's who I was. I was flawed, I made a lot of mistakes, but I knew I had a lot to learn, and I constantly tried to improve and constantly tried to learn new things. And that is what a teacher is. And so therefore, I think I was a whole teacher. But you know what? What's been such a pleasure to see is that the two of you, unquestionably at this moment, you are both a whole teacher. And all that fractions business, it's been lovely to see you make this journey, but you're there now. So what have I just said to you both? I've just said you are flawed human beings with a lot to learn. But that's what human beings are. And you are absolutely going to be brilliant, and you are going to make such a difference to the lives of so many children. And it has been a huge and colossal privilege and a pleasure to work with the whole cohort this year. It's been a great cohort. And the two of you, and through this podcast and through the work done this year, it has been a pleasure and a privilege. Thank you both very much indeed.
Wow. Thank you, Jeremy. That's
mic drop.
Lovely.
Thanks, Jeremy.
What a very kind way to end what is, I suppose, the end of our PGC, the end of our first season of the podcast. And there's get ready for the summer.
So there will be season 2. There's going to be an ECT podcast. I so hope.
Yes. So, Jeremy, would you be open to coming back on in the future and talking about life with us?
I'd love to be involved in that. Yeah, thank you. Honoured.
Well,
I am.
You have your mug. We got Jeremy a mug with his face on. So obviously our socials will have an update. Yes, there's the mug. So our social will have an update this week. So when we send it out, we'll have a picture of Jeremy. Oh, look, is that on your desk?
It's on my desk. Of course it's on my desk.
Stop it.
I'm holding up a framed picture. We all got them. All three of us have got them. I'm holding up a framed picture, which is the podcast logo image, which has got a very accurate portrayal of Jen and Francis,
I don't know,
cartoon characters, and an extremely generous and flattering image of me for this episode.
Again, graphic designer is not my strong point. I'm working on that.
Well, I'd love to say you've captured me perfectly, but you have managed to produce an image which just about is identifiable as me, but is incredibly flattering. So thank you.
It kind of matches what you're wearing today. I see the tie. We got our cohort got Jeremy a tie. I see the tie today. Love the tie.
Treasured possession. This tie.
Mathematical, as anyone listening would expect.
Absolutely, but yeah, and actually, surprisingly, it looks quite similar to how you look today.
If I was wearing a suit jacket, it would be spot on.
Well, This has been so much fun. Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on and last reflection of the PGCE year with us. It's been a roller coaster. And we made it, buddy. Francis, we made it.
You made it. You made
Well, great to be here. Great to have a bit of time now to reset and get ready for what is going to be a busy first year of ECT in a couple of months' time.
So exciting.
Good luck, guys. It's going to be fabulous.
Well, thank you so much, not just for coming on today, but for everything over the last year. And we look forward to keeping in touch and let you know how it goes.
For anyone out there, this is our last episode, so we'll be back in late August for ECT Eras.
Sounds great. Have a wonderful summer. You've deserved it, and look forward to catching up in the late summer, early autumn.
Yep. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Fraction of a Teacher. We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we've enjoyed recording it. Please share a link with your fellow teachers and friends. We release new episodes every second Thursday morning, UK time.
And if you do love it, I suggest you hit that subscribe button, leave us a review, and follow us on social media at Fraction of a Teacher Podcast for updates so you never miss anything. We do love hearing from you with your questions, your thoughts, and your ideas. So if you have any, please email us at fractionoat@gmail.com. Until next time, keep smiling.
And keep solving those problems.